The United States State Department calls these places do not travel zones for a reason. But what led them from tourist hotspot to no-go nightmare? And are you truly safe just because you stay away? Haiti, home to more than 11 million people, has become the definition of chaos in 2025. The country's only international airport sits mostly silent, as commercial flights are grounded, and the United States government warns that even its own staff may not be able to help Americans in trouble. Armed gangs now control over 85% of Port-au-Prince, and their reach keeps spreading. Just this year, over 660 kidnappings have been recorded, with criminal groups snatching everyone from market vendors to aid workers. Some neighborhoods have all but emptied out. Entire communities, like Mirabales, forced to flee after gangs stormed the local jail and released more than 500 inmates. The Artibonite region, once considered a safer bet, now sees more than half the country's abductions. Gangs aren't just after ransom money. They're using kidnappings, sexual violence, and roadblocks as weapons to control territory and terrorize anyone who gets in their way. In the first 6 months of 2025 alone, more than 4,000 people have been killed in gang-related violence. Police stations, hospitals, and even humanitarian convoys are fair game. The United Nations has called these attacks crimes against humanity, but on the ground, it's just survival. For Americans, the risk isn't theoretical. There are no safe routes, no reliable rescue plans, and no guarantee that a blue passport will buy anything but a bigger ransom demand. Next up is Burkina Faso, a country of about 23 million, where the threat shifts from criminal anarchy to militant insurgency. Here, the danger wears a different face. Terrorist groups like Jenim, Al-Qaeda's local franchise, have turned the Sahel into a war zone. In May, hundreds of JNM fighters swept into the provincial capital of Djibo at dawn, overrunning the military base, torching the hospital, and targeting anyone suspected of helping the government. The militants held the city for 9 hours, leaving behind more than 100 dead, including soldiers, police, and civilians. JNM's own statement claimed 200 Burkinab soldiers killed, and locals say the real number may never be known. The attack wasn't a one-off. Coordinated assaults hit other towns the same morning, stretching government forces thin. American travelers aren't just caught in the crossfire, they're prime targets. Kidnapping for ransom remains a constant threat, especially for foreigners, with the risk highest outside the capital, Ouagadougou. The United States Embassy has cut staff to the bone, and official movement is restricted to a tight perimeter. Even the main roads can turn deadly. Armed checkpoints, ambushes, and roadside bombs are routine. In Burkina Faso, the line between battlefield and backroad has all but disappeared. For Americans thinking of a visit, it's like walking into a live minefield where the rules change by the hour, and the only certainty is danger. That's the reality on the first rungs of the global risk ladder, where chaos rules in the streets and ideology fuels the gunfire. The Democratic Republic of the Congo, with a population topping 100 million, is a place where chaos has its own rules, and the rules are written by more than 120 armed groups. In the country's east, the government's grip is so weak that militias run entire provinces. These aren't just ragtag bands. They're well-armed, well-funded, and they fight over everything from gold mines to grazing rights. The M23, backed by thousands of Rwandan soldiers, has turned towns like Goma into war zones. The Allied Democratic Forces, linked to ISIS, made 2024 the deadliest year for civilians in a decade, with over 1,600 reported killed. Trying to visit? The DRC's visa process is a bureaucratic obstacle course. Think 8 weeks of paperwork, ministry letters, and background checks, all for a chance to set foot in a country where the US State Department says bluntly, do not travel. Even if you get your visa, there's no guarantee you'll make it past a checkpoint. The risk isn't just theoretical. Ebola outbreaks have flared up in Equateur province, and health workers still remember the days when treatment centers in Katwa and Butembo were torched by armed men. In 2025, attacks have shifted to hospitals and clinics in Ituri, with nearly half the health centers in Drodro destroyed or abandoned. Violence has forced Médecins Sans Frontières to pull out of entire districts. Over 7 million people are now displaced, and the roads connecting cities are controlled by whoever has the most guns that week. Markets are bombed, food convoys are hijacked, and in some towns, the only law is the one written on the side of a pickup truck. For Americans, the risk goes way beyond getting caught in the crossfire. Kidnappings, targeted attacks, and the total collapse of local authority mean there's no backup if things go sideways. Now, Chad, population 18.8 million, takes things up a notch. In June 2025, Chad's government made a move that left no room for interpretation. All visas for Americans, across the board, are suspended. This wasn't a paperwork delay or a quiet freeze. It was a public declaration, straight from President Mahamat Idris Deby. Chad has its dignity and its pride. The message was payback for the US adding Chad to its own travel ban list. No visa means no entry, no matter who you are. Americans with trips planned were left scrambling, and even those holding valid visas were told to stay home until further notice. This isn't just a diplomatic spat, it's a hard border. Chad has long been a key US security partner in the Sahel, but with this move, the door slammed shut. Embassy staff have been reduced to a skeleton crew, and the US government now warns citizens not to count on any help if trouble hits. In Chad, the message is clear. If you're holding a blue passport, you're not welcome. And with regional alliances shifting and tensions rising, that's not likely to change anytime soon. Now let's hop over to Yemen, a country with a population estimated to be around 30 million. The idea of visiting Yemen is met with stern warnings about civil unrest, terrorism, kidnapping, and armed conflict. The US Embassy in Sana'a has been shuttered since 2015, and in 2025, the State Department's Level 4 advisory isn't just a red flag, it's a full stop. The war here has dragged on for a decade, with the Houthi movement holding the capital and large swaths of the north. American airstrikes like Operation Rough Rider this spring have hammered Houthi positions after a series of attacks on Red Sea shipping. But the blowback is real. Anti-American sentiment runs deep, and the Houthis have made it clear that foreigners, especially Americans, are bargaining chips in their proxy war with the West. The US government says it can't assist citizens at all. No consular services, no rescue, not even a working phone line. Getting a visa is like trying to win the lottery. Most applications don't even get a reply, and those that do often hit a dead end. Somalia's story isn't much brighter. With a population just over 17 million, it's a place where the word unstable barely scratches the surface. Al-Shabaab, the local Al-Qaeda franchise, has doubled its fatal attacks since 2020, and in 2025, the group recaptured key towns like Sabid and Anole after government and African Union forces pulled out. US drone strikes still target militant commanders, but the group's reach keeps growing, and American involvement only fuels more hostility. The visa process here is, frankly, a gamble. Think of it as trying to thread a needle while riding a roller coaster. Even if you manage to get approval, there's no guarantee you'll make it past the airport. The U.S. Embassy is locked down inside the Mogadishu airport complex, and all official movement is tightly controlled. Embassy staff are restricted to a patch of tarmac, and any American who steps outside that perimeter is on their own. Kidnapping, car bombs, and targeted attacks are a daily threat, and the U.S. government's ability to help is so limited, it's basically non-existent. Both Yemen and Somalia are places where American military policy casts a long shadow. Airstrikes and troop deployments have made the U.S. a household name, but not in a good way. The result? A cocktail of threats, armed groups eager for ransom, bureaucratic mazes that keep travelers out, and a security climate where an American passport is more of a liability than a shield. If you're thinking of visiting, it's not just a matter of paperwork or luck. It's like walking on eggshells while blindfolded, with no safety net and nowhere to turn if things go wrong. Libya is a country that's been through more plot twists than an entire season of Game of Thrones. As of 2025, 7 million people call it home, but an American passport is far from a golden ticket here. The State Department's Level 4 advisory names crime, terrorism, and the lingering shadow of Benghazi as reasons to stay away. The 2012 attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi, which killed Ambassador Chris Stevens and 3 other Americans, still shapes every conversation about security. Fast forward to today, and the U.S. Embassy in Tripoli is shuttered, with consular services handled out of Tunis. That means if you get in trouble, help is literally across the sea. And that's if you can even get in. Libya's visa process is a maze, often requiring connections with local authorities who may or may not answer the phone. And just to make things more complicated, if your passport has an Israeli stamp, don't even bother booking a ticket. The Libyan government has a strict ban on anyone with Israeli entry or exit stamps, a rule that's caught more than a few travelers off guard at the border. Once inside, the challenges keep stacking up. The government's grip barely extends beyond the capital, and the real power often sits with local militias. These are the folks who set up checkpoints, enforce their own rules, and decide who gets to move or who gets detained. Outbreaks of violence can happen without warning, and even peaceful protests can turn into firefights. Landmines and unexploded ordnance are scattered across the countryside, a leftover hazard from years of shifting battle lines. For Americans, the risk isn't just theoretical. There are no safe zones, and the U.S. government's ability to help is almost non-existent. If you need to get out in a hurry, you could find yourself stuck, with exit procedures that can turn into days of waiting, or worse, questioning by armed groups who don't care about your travel plans. Iraq, hovering near 40 million people, feels like a Rubik's Cube for any traveler holding a U.S. passport. The post-2003 invasion era left a patchwork of armed groups, government factions, and foreign interests, all vying for control. Getting a visa approved can take up to 90 days on average, and that's if your paperwork is flawless. But the real kicker comes when it's time to leave. The exit stamp process is its own ordeal. Think endless lines, sudden security checks, and the ever-present risk of being held up by a local official who wants to double-check your paperwork or just flex a little power. Reports of travelers facing hours or even days of exit delays aren't rare, and some have had to pay expedited fees just to get out before their flight. For Americans, the dangers aren't just bureaucratic. The threat of kidnapping, targeted attacks, and arbitrary detention is real, especially outside Baghdad or the Kurdish region. Human rights groups still report cases of torture and abuse in government-run detention centers. If you're caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, there's no guarantee anyone can help. The U.S. Embassy operates under heavy security, and movement outside the green zone is tightly controlled. Even with the right paperwork, getting in and out of Iraq can feel like threading a needle while blindfolded, and hoping the needle doesn't move. In both Libya and Iraq, the welcome mat is missing. What's left is a landscape of shifting alliances, unpredictable rules, and a sense that for Americans, the door is barely cracked open, if it's open at all. Afghanistan, with a population nearing 41 million, stands as one of the most forbidding destinations for Americans in 2025. The Taliban, now in full control, have turned the country into a diplomatic black hole. No U.S. embassy, no reliable consular services, and a government the world refuses to formally recognize. For anyone holding a blue passport, the rules are written in disappearing ink. Getting in is not just about paperwork. It is a test of patience and luck. The official process for a single-entry tourist visa involves a letter from a ministry. But even with every box checked, about 7 out of 10 applicants walk away empty-handed. That is not just rumor. Travel industry insiders and recent applicants report that roughly 70% of tourist visa requests are denied outright, with no explanation given. The ones who do get approval often find their visas canceled at the last minute, or are told the paperwork is invalid unless re-registered in Kabul. But the real danger is not at the border. It is what happens if you make it inside. Americans have become political bargaining chips, especially dual nationals. In 2025 alone, more than a dozen U.S. citizens have been detained by Taliban security forces, sometimes held for months without charges or contact with the outside world. The State Department's warning is not just boilerplate. Wrongful detention is a real risk, and any perceived connection to the U.S. government, media, or aid groups can make you a target. The threat does not stop there. ISIS-K, the Islamic State's Afghan branch, has stepped up attacks in Kabul and other major cities, targeting foreigners as symbols of Western influence. For Americans, the risk is layered. Detention by the Taliban, violence from rival militants, and the ever-present possibility of being used as a pawn in a geopolitical standoff. The odds of getting in are slim, but the odds of getting stuck are much, much higher. Syria and Iran have turned the art of detaining Americans into a high-stakes diplomatic game. In Syria, even getting a visa is like finding a golden ticket. Fewer than 100 were issued in 2024, and most applications vanish into a bureaucratic black hole. For those who somehow make it in, the risk is off the charts. Syrian intelligence services treat U.S. citizens, especially dual nationals, as bargaining chips. Detentions can happen without warning, and the government rarely acknowledges holding Americans, let alone allows outside contact. The U.S. State Department's warning isn't just boilerplate. Travelers face a real threat of being swept up, interrogated, or used as leverage in negotiations that have nothing to do with them. Iran's playbook is even more calculated. The legacy of the 1979 hostage crisis still echoes in every interaction. As of mid-2025, Iran continues to hold at least 4 U.S. dual nationals, and the number fluctuates as new cases surface and others are swapped in hush-hush deals. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps is notorious for detaining Americans on vague charges, espionage, propaganda, or simply having the wrong connections. Detainee swaps have become routine, with each side trading citizens like pieces on a chessboard. For visitors, the practical hurdles stack up quickly. The visa process drags on for months, and once inside, everyday life is shaped by restrictions. Forget about using foreign bank cards. US sanctions mean you're locked out of the global financial system, forced to carry cash and hope nothing goes wrong. The threat isn't just theoretical. At Tehran's airport, Americans have been pulled aside, interrogated, and, in some cases, barred from leaving the country for weeks or months. In both countries, the message is clear. Americans aren't just unwelcome, they're potential hostages. The risk of arbitrary detention hangs over every interaction, and for dual nationals, the danger is even greater. If the government decides to make an example, there's little anyone can do. The blue passport becomes a liability, not a shield, and the line between tourist and pawn disappears fast. North Korea, with a population of about 26 million, stands in a league of its own when it comes to shutting out Americans. The US passport travel ban, first imposed in 2017, is still in full force for 2025, renewed each year without a hint of softening. For most Americans, it's not just a matter of jumping through hoops or facing a cold welcome. The law makes it illegal to even try. The only way in is with a rare, case-by-case waiver from the State Department, usually granted for urgent humanitarian reasons or journalism. Think less tourist selfie and more Red Cross mission. The ban isn't just about policy, it's about real risk. North Korea's security organs treat foreign visitors as potential bargaining chips, and the memory of Otto Warmbier, an American student detained in 2016 and returned to the US in a coma, still hangs heavy. Even minor infractions, like taking a political poster or speaking with locals without a guide, can lead to years in the country's penal system. Surveillance is total, movement is tightly scripted, and every conversation is monitored. No commercial flights or trains connect North Korea directly with the US, and travel agencies that once offered group tours to Americans have long since closed those doors. The State Department doesn't mince words. If you manage to get in and something goes wrong, there's no embassy, no consular help, and no reliable way out. For Americans, North Korea isn't just unwelcoming, it's a legal and physical dead end. The border is more than a line on a map. It's a wall with no door. In 2025, the United States State Department listed 12 countries at Level 4, Do Not Travel for Americans, with North Korea enforcing a total passport ban and Chad suspending visas in direct response to United States policy. Throughout this countdown, we have seen how decades of armed conflict, diplomatic fallout, and retaliatory visa rules have built barriers that go far beyond paperwork. Yet many official documents remain classified, and the full extent of detainee cases or future diplomatic shifts is still unknown. What's clear is that, for United States travelers, these countries now represent not just bureaucratic hurdles, but real risks to safety and freedom of movement. As of this year, the combination of security threats, state hostility, and official bans makes these 12 nations the most unwelcoming destinations for Americans, by the numbers and by the facts.